Throughout the Baroque and early classical periods in music, composers used what are referred to as figured bass symbols below a notated bass part to indicate the notes that would complete the chords. Figured bass symbols include numbers, accidentals, and other symbols. The figured bass will generally be found in what is referred to as the continuo. This is most often a harpsichord that is joined by a bass instrument such as a bassoon. A continuo part will be notated as a melody in bass clef, and the harpsichord or other chord instrument will play the melody along with the bassoon or another bass instrument. In addition to playing this melody on the harpsichord, chords will be played as indicated by the figured bass symbols. To know what notes to play for the chords, the performer would read the figured bass symbols. Figured bass symbols simply indicate the intervals that are to be used above a notated bass note, along with any alterations. In the study of music theory, we use figured bass as a tool to analyze music. A bass note with no symbol below will designate a root position triad. In the following example, we see chords with figures written below some bass notes, but other bass notes have no figures. The chords with no figures are root position triads, with the bass note being the root and the remainder of the notes of the triad coming from the key signature. This example is in the key of C minor, and the first chord, with C in the bass and no figure, is a root position C minor triad. No figure below a bass note is a shorthand indication for a root position triad. Understanding the longhand will give us a basic understanding for how all figured bass symbols work. The longhand for a root position triad is 5-3. This indicates the intervals above the bass note that can be used to spell the remainder of the chord. Here we have a G note in bass clef with a 5-3 figure. The 5 tells us to use the note that is a fifth above the G within the key signature. This is a D note. The 3 tells us to use the note that is a third above the G within the key signature. This is a B note. Therefore, the 3 notes of this triad are G, B, and D, making this a G major triad or a 1 chord in the key of G. Here is another example. We have the same G note with a 5-3 figure, but this time we have a key signature of E flat major. The fifth above the bass is D, and the third above the bass is B flat. Therefore, the 3 notes of this triad are G, B flat, and D, making this a G minor triad, or a 3 chord in the key of E flat major. Another common figure that refers to a root position triad is simply a lone accidental below a bass note. When an accidental is used by itself below a bass note, it refers to the note in interval of a third above the bass, getting that accidental. For example, here we have a D note in the bass in the key of G minor. This figure tells us that the chord is in root position, and the sharp tells us to add the sharp to the third of the chord. We will therefore have the D root, F sharp as the third, and A as the fifth. This is a D major chord or a 5 chord in the key of G minor. This type of figure is often found on a 5 chord in a minor key, indicating the raised 7th note or leading tone to the key. Here is another example. We have a C bass note with a natural for the figured bass. The key is F minor. The natural tells us that this is a root position triad, and to place a natural on the note that is a third above the bass. The note a third above the bass is E flat, so it becomes E. As a root position triad, the notes of the chord are C, E, and G. This is a 5 chord in the key of F minor. Let's summarize. Figure bass symbols are used to indicate intervals and their alterations above a given bass note. These figures indicate the chords that are used. A root position triad is generally indicated in shorthand with no figures below a bass note. The longhand indication for a root position triad is 5-3, indicating the intervals used from that key signature above the bass note. An accidental used by itself below a bass note indicates that the accidental will be added to the note a third above the bass.